Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton.
Greetings.
Welcome, Buck.
Always glad to be here.
It's always good to have you here.
It's good to be had.
We often, ask about how things are going in your world as we start our conversation, and I think you made some clever remarks. I can recollect about any thing you'd like to share about with the audience. You've done that in the past. What about wickedness is afoot in the world, or anything to be said?
Well, I suppose to quote Oscar Wilde, every saint has a past and every sinner has a future.
Okay, all right. I'm going to brood about that. That's quite good. That's quite good, Buck. Well, after that little comment, maybe we can discuss some of the facts that are going on in the world. And right now, there's an enormous world upheaval going on, and in many fronts. And we could possibly start discussing the Supreme Court decisions coming before the Supreme Court on the Chevron case, which, as I understand,
the Chevron Doctrine. Yes.
Doctrine was.
Yes.
This happened in 1984. I think an appeals court.
Yes.
I didn't get to the Supreme Court, I don't think, but I could be wrong. But maybe it did.
You've caught me. I think it probably did get to the Supreme. So,
the story is that, as I understand it, is that the federal bureaucracy has the responsibility of refining laws. So for instance, if the law says, I don't know, the government will allow fishing on Saturday afternoon. You can fish on Saturday afternoon. Well, then what does that mean exactly? What is fishing? Well, fishing means not necessarily against fish. So fishing could mean other things. It could mean, that's what I guess the bureaucracy could say, or when is Saturday afternoon? When is that exactly? And is it ubiquitous around the Saturday afternoon? We'll expand it. It's Saturday afternoon in California. It might not be in the East Coast. Maybe that's a labored example. But the bureaucracy fills in the gray areas of laws. Did I miss that?
Yeah, not even so much gray areas. Let's back up. Before we even talk about that, let's talk about what the bureaucracy is. Okay. Because we have the principle of separation.
It sounds like a bad word, doesn't it?
Yes, and I kind of think
word.
To a degree it is, but it's a necessary evil, I think.
Yes.
The principle of separation of powers. We have the power to make law, which in this country we delegate to the legislature, be it the state legislature or Congress. Right. The power to go out and carry those laws into effect, and that's what the executive branch does. And something that we'll undoubtedly get to a little bit later in our episode today. If there is uncertainty in what exactly the law means, that's where the courts come into play, and they clarify and explain and interpret the law. Well, as we moved into the Industrial Revolution and as society essentially got more technological and more complex and more crowded, Congress began delegating, if you will, some of its rulemaking authority to executive agencies. The first permanent executive administrative agency was the Interstate Commerce Commission in 1887. And from there it grew. And today anybody can name the Food and Drug Administration, the FAA, the FCC, the National Labor Relations Board, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There are just, I don't know how many of these. And the interesting thing is that these bureaucratic organizations, none of whom are elected, some are appointed to terms by the president, but they are certainly not chosen by the electorate. And so there's a layer of insulation between these unelected rulemakers and bureaucrats and those of us who are supposedly the people in charge of the whole system, the American voter. They have fused within themselves the power to make law, to enforce it, and occasionally to interpret it, which is where the Chevron Doctrine comes in. That these administrative agencies can promulgate what are called administrative regulations or regs. because Congress says we're sketching out the broad outlines here within the statute, but within that statute, the regulatory agency can actually promulgate regulations that have the force of law. And there are tons of these regulations. I can't even begin to tell you the number of regs that are, federal regs that are currently in place. I will tell you that I was just looking this up the other day, and the estimate is that there are 300,000 administrative regs, the breach of which carry a criminal penalty. And those are just the criminal ones. So
everyone must be guilty of something.
Everybody's guilty of something.
You violated something. I don't know what you did. I don't know, swam in the stream.
You cut the label off the pillow.
Whatever you did, you weren't supposed to go swimming that day or whatever. It hurts wildlife if you swam that day.
It makes the concept of ignorance of law being no excuse. Because everybody breaks the law every day. But so at any rate, these administrative agencies, which once again I stress are not elected by anybody,
yes,
pass vast amounts of regs.
Yes.
And not only do they get to pass them, they get to hold hearings and sanction people. And as far as the Chevron doctrine is concerned, often interpret what those regs mean for themselves. So it's a fusion of these three powers, making, enforcing, and interpreting, that up to that point we had striven so strongly to keep separate from each other.
Well, and the courts, I mean, as I understand it, well, somebody's got to do something here if there's a dispute. And I think the issue that's come before the Supreme Court are these herring fishermen here that apparently there was some law, I'm going to probably not say this correctly, but there was a law that the amount of fish that were being caught needed to be understood and regulated to prevent overfishing. And then the legislative, the commission, the bureaucracy said, well, we've decided to make the fishermen pay for this. There's no law they have to pay for it. No, we'll just do that.
Well, there's a reg.
Right, they put a reg.
And once again, you got to stress, a reg has, it is a law. It's simply a law passed by a bureaucrat rather than a law passed by Congress.
Now, as I understand it, the way these are propagated is that there's public comment. Is that right? So we put these regs, and who reads them? I mean,
yes.
I'm a big fisherman. I'm out there with my family or my kids. We're out there fishing for lobster or whatever we fish for. And hey, by the way, Dad, what is it, son? Did you been reading the federal regs this month? I mean, they have a lot of stuff on Arizona wildlife. In fact, this book. No one is going to do that.
It's called the Federal Register, and it comes out every day.
No normal human is going to read it.
Well, that's your problem. I mean, there was, as you're absolutely right. There is there's a window for public comment. You can write in,
and whether it did any good would be another matter.
Yes. Well, just because you comment doesn't mean they have to pay attention.
But it makes it appear
yes.
that these regulations have been sanctified by public opinion. Well, no one objected to it, or we had 3 letters, that said something bad, and one that was. So there was. I think everybody thought it was okay.
Yes.
Well, now this is it's going to the Supreme Court, and apparently because of at least this is the word on the street, if one can say it that way. These are Republican justices appointed by Republican presidents. They're going to change the situation, which would be a revolution. And it's my understanding that President Trump threw out millions or attempted to when he was there, take a lot of regulations away. People try and take regulations out. And that may make things more efficient. It may have some upside, downside, but that would be quite a revolution. If this happened,
yes.
It would really be huge.
Well, the Chevron doctrine, which we've been referring to, the Chevron case that came out in the 80s is simply this, that the courts, the Article III courts, that written into the Constitution of the United States.
Meaning Article III, they're in the Constitution.
Yes, as opposed to...
A tax court might not be a...
Well, no, that would probably be considered an Article III court as well, because it's created by Congress. But an Article I court is an administrative court. It's a court that's essentially part of one of these bureaucratic agencies. And as such,
Do they have judges?
they have judges, but they're part of the same agency that promulgated the rules,
Right.
so you don't have that separation of powers. So the Chevron Doctrine said the Article III courts, whether it was the Supreme Court or the Federal Court of Appeals, said that in the event of an ambiguity in one of these regs, we're essentially going in these highly technical regs.
Right.
If you're dealing with a pharmaceutical reg
Sure.
or something like, or air traffic control reg, we here in the courts, or the Article III, the regular judiciary, we are going to defer in the event of one of those ambiguities to how the administrative agency itself chooses to understand and apply that reg.
Yes.
Because we here in the court system just don't have the expertise
Isn't
necessary
that true?
to do that.
I mean, could there? I mean, 300 regulations. I mean, 300,000.
No,
I mean,
300,000.
all kinds of. I mean, people just.
No, there are 300,000 with a criminal penalty.
Well,
I mean, they're probably 10 times that many.
Can
so.
these people send you to prison? I
Oh,
mean,
yes,
I mean,
yes,
so
yes.
you're a fisherman and you did something wrong.
Well,
and,
they can
by the
certainly-
regulation. You violated the regulation, and now you're.
Yeah, they can. Well, they can certainly impose criminal fines upon you.
Yes.
So the jail time, I'm not sure about that. I'm not an administrative lawyer,
right,
so.
right.
But that's just 300,000 criminal penalties. So
And millions of others.
There are probably 10 times that many that invoke civil regulations.
I would say this.
So.
When I was on the the Georgia board of looking at physicians, the composite medical board, we propagated regulations. We did that. I mean, what are we going to? There'd be something going on. Well, let's put that in. We tried to do a good job with it. It's almost impossible not to. I
Yes.
mean, if to give some kind of clearance because the laws are so vague. I mean, what are we going?
Yes.
How do you make it more concrete?
Yes, well, I mean, looking at it in microcosm, it certainly makes sense. I mean, if you look at the Georgia bar, which is a slightly different thing because the bar has always been there in its own little guild, you can see why these regulations exist. And once again, I go back to the FDA, and
Yes.
you need to know what's in your drugs or
Right.
or what's in your food, and I get that. But when you just start looking at the aggregate, these millions of things, and at the fact. And once again, speaking from the principle of classical constitutionalism, 18th century constitutionalism, the people who, first of all, are not elected and who come up with these regs get to tell you what these regs mean and punish you for it if you violate them. That's a concatenation of power that's really very bad. So.
Is this unavoidable? I'll say this. I mean, I've made these analogies before. Now, in the old days, we were cowboys out in the Wild West, and your interchange with other people were limited. Your connections with the world were a lot less. You lived your life maybe almost by yourself, hermit-like out there on your farm. And now it's like being in a nuclear submarine. You're down there with thousands of people interconnected, and how do you get along with everyone? I mean, it would appear that there needs to be some markers about appropriate conduct. And as the country gets more diverse and more complicated, I think we're seeing a lot of tensions on that subject, regulations on every point.
Yes.
People.
Well, it's not just the number of people. I would say, and that's certainly a big one. But I would say the first movement in that direction was the state of technology. That the ICC, its mandate was to regulate interstate railroad rates. And so the railroad was a new thing, and it led to vast new concentrations of wealth. And the customers of that railroad who quickly became reliant upon the railroad believed that the railroad was essentially shafting them in terms
Yes.
of charging exorbitant prices. Or the example that I always use in my class. So in 1800, you're an oat farmer in Pennsylvania. You're growing your oats. If you can't grow what you need there on your farm to eat, you probably are buying it from somebody in the neighborhood, somebody you know.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in 1900, these foods are being shipped in via this new technology of the railroad from literally thousands of miles away. The drugs that you are taking, you are buying through a production chain, and you do not know who is on the other end of it. You don't know who made it. And so you are not in a position as a consumer to make informed decisions. And so the government is going to become the watchdog for you because there's no other way to know. And that's how it began, and that's how it snowballed.
Well, now, one of the, to me, complicated things about our country is the relationship between property, wealth, the government, and the people, if you want to say it that way, how all that works out. And so the capitalist system has all these great advantages. It's in the American DNA. It does these good things. And on the other hand, it could injure people if the only motivation were profit. And so the government is kind of the policeman to make sure things work out. And I think certainly in many conservative circles, the idea would be, well, the people that are the protectors have actually turned it into, I guess, some kind of inspector, some terrible enemy of capitalism. They're the enemies of property, enemies of capitalism, and their view would be, well, let's see, we're not going to let mergers take place, we're not going to let you fish. We don't really like fishermen. We don't like people that fish. We just don't like them. And we have a bias against them, and we're going to do something to injure them. I mean, just as part of our raison d'etre. We don't like capitalism, we don't like this. And if you're the fisherman and the person is obviously overstepping his power, then what do you do about it? And presumably this is what's taking place in the Supreme Court. They're saying this power is getting aggregated inappropriately.
Yes, well, there are a couple of directions. I mean, theoretically, and I do stress the word theoretically, because I do want to give a fair shake to the other side. A federal bureau, a federal agency cannot, it's got to work within the framework established by Congress. So as Congress says you can do X, Y, and Z in the enabling legislation, the Bureau in question cannot exceed its brief. And if Congress says we are passing this law because we want it to be blue, and you carry out and you enact you promulgate the regs to help it be blue, the agency cannot turn around and say we're going to make it red because it's exceeding its brief. And if the agency does that, in theory, and I say in theory, Congress can step in and say, no, you can't do that. And the courts can do it, not just in theory, but in practice. And the voter can call their congressman saying, this agency's out of control, these regs are bad. Where the Chevron doctrine steps in is if it's not as blatant as that. Congress has said blue, the administrative agency has said red. Yeah, the courts can get involved in that.
It turns out to be purple.
Yeah, but
so what do we do with purple?
If it's cyan, perhaps.
Yes.
Under the Chevron doctrine, the court is going to defer to that. So the case coming up now before the Supremes is to reevaluate the Chevron doctrine. Maybe the federal courts ought to become more activist in second-guessing what the agencies are doing, take a more activist role, if you will, in carrying out judicial oversight of how these regs are being drafted and how they're being interpreted.
It would appear to me that one thing would be some kind of congressional, maybe the imbalance between the three branches, and we've spoken about that a little bit, is impressive. The members of Congress are often birds of passage. I mean, they have their own limited life expectancy. The government, the executive branch, people are there for their whole careers, their whole 40 years of man and boy doing whatever they do. And so they've got a lot of power to start with. And should Congress have more, and there are congressional offices that do things. I mean, they have,
there's the Government Accountability Office.
They do things, Yeah. Maybe they should get more. Maybe there should be more.
Congressional Budget Office.
I know, but maybe do more, just to make sure there's not an overreach. The court system, is that going to be the appropriate venue for this to sort of bring them, I mean, occasionally maybe, but it would just some kind of fight over the, I don't know, packaging or some kind of arcane discussion about in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the person that is produces packages made them in the wrong way or something, and he said, no, I didn't, and oh no, here's the rule, and we're going to do something bad to you, and I didn't know what the rule was, says the pastor. I mean, but how are the appeals? Just to ask this question: 300,000 criminal charges that are out there. There must be plenty of disputes about this. How are they handled through the
agency itself? A lot of the time, that's where the Chevron doctrine comes in. The courts essentially say, if there's an ambiguity here, if it's highly technical and we're not sure how it's written, we are just going to defer on behalf of the agency. The agency knows what it's doing, it knows better than we do, so we will accept the agency's rule. That is the Chevron doctrine. If the Chevron doctrine gets overturned, the courts will say, no, it's going to be a lot easier for a litigant to come into the court and say, hey, those guys in the agency did wrong. We want you to review it. So if Congress is not being responsive, that's really the only other option.
Can the judicial system handle that? I mean, it appears to me there are weights, and I mean, you certainly have all the immigration issues, millions of people floating around. We'll see you in 10 years, or is there enough judicial resources to do that?
Probably not.
And then I bring the issue up about the IRS.
Yes.
So the IRS, is this one of those agencies? I don't quite understand how tax courts work, but presumably the IRS says, well, you turned in an exemption for your mother-in-law, saying that it was bad for somehow. The mother-in-law caused my health to deteriorate, and whatever. I'm going to put some kind of special fee on her, or whatever. And then the IRS said, no, you can't do that. That's wrong. And then, well, I protest. And how does that work? I mean, there are billions of dollars in the IRS arrangements. I think they're tax courts, but wouldn't that be a prime? The regulations that are put there by the IRS, I think there are just thousands of them, aren't there? Thousands, and they propagated. The Congress did not put these regulations in, did they?
Well, I mean, if you look at, there is a federal income tax code, and just by itself, and I'm talking about a congressional act here, just by itself, the federal tax code is mind-bogglingly complex. I mean, that's why God made. This is where public accountants came from. I mean, you can check if you look at the evolution of the CPA. It pretty much mirrors the development of income taxes and of corporate development.
Yes.
So, but yeah, the tax court itself is an Article III court. It's not. It's not
just getting in there.
Court,
I mean, how hard is it? I mean, maybe that's an example. If there is such a court, my understanding is this. Well, you want to fight this about your mother-in-law's taxes. It'll be a 10-year trip.
Yes.
Into,
yes.
I mean, and we have to pay 10 years of a lawyer. I mean, maybe in another 10 years we'll get some kind of answer.
Yes.
I mean,
well,
it's not an ideal conflict resolution, is it?
Well, this is a problem with justice. It really is the courts in this country are becoming ever more, all the time, a rich man's resort. That it is just so hard to bring a case and the money involved in shelling out to lawyers to navigate this. So it's not an ideal fix. But once again, if Congress is not policing these things, and if you've got that insulation between the elected official and the voters who don't like these regs, then the only other option, is to litigate. And so this court is considering the option of repealing the Chevron doctrine or overruling the Chevron doctrine, and theoretically making it easier to access the courts to challenge these things. Is that a good answer? Maybe not. It may be the best of a bad set of options.
Now, my understanding is that we have a country that is an exceptional place. It's not like anywhere else, and so the capitalist system really works. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And if you compare, say, France, nice French people are nice, like French people, but their system is quite state-oriented. The state's watching everything. It does this, it does that, and it makes their capitalist system not work as well, and thus the income that's generated by the system to pay for taxes, income redistribution, et cetera, maintain their healthcare system, there's not as much money. And so is one of the potential advantages of, let's say, the country having these economic difficulties is making innovation easier to accomplish. Would that a particular needful advantage in these difficult times? The country would be wealthier, if I could phrase it that
well,
way.
before we started the episode today, we were talking off camera, and I mentioned Churchill. I'm now going to talk about Churchill in a slightly different context. That William Manchester's just magisterial biography
Yes.
of Churchill, the last line. At the end of his introduction to Volume 1, he says, today the ordinary individual has a much easier life. It's the extraordinary individual that finds himself or herself impeded by all these regulations and all these rules and laws. And that's very true. I mean, we've been slamming the bureaucracy pretty heavily through this episode. And once again, coming from the perspective of classical constitutionalism, the elimination of separation of powers really does bug me. But look on the whole at the benefits that the regulatory and administrative state has conferred upon us. I don't know what you've got in that glass, but if it's water, you can probably credit, or what is it?
It's
is
coffee.
It
it's a
it's
remnant.
coffee?
Remember, it's sort of
okay,
a little caffeine. Is
but that's a highly safe thing.
It could be alcohol, but no.
Yeah, but it's a highly safe thing to drink because of federal regulations. The water in your tap is, generally speaking, I know about Flint, Michigan, but the reason why people got so wrought up about Flint was because it was a glaring exception to the general rule that we've got safe drinking water here. That the Boeing emergency exit blew out in flight. The thing that made the news for that is because it so rarely happens. And that rarity is often due to the stringency of federal regs and the enforcement of federal regs. So we do get a benefit from this. So.
I'll second that. Actually, that's quite correct. And I mean, it's just how you keep that in the middle of the road. I mean, there's no question. I was sort of made this case about the nuclear submarine. Mm-hmm. So we're all, the rules, we're all together. We've got all these complexities. Yes, we're going to fly somewhere. And in the old days, well, I'll ride my horse into into town. And I look after my horse and I don't have to worry about how safe the airplane is. That's true. All the issues that go on, and the interconnections are pretty extraordinary. So if you mention water, you could say your shoes, whatever is going on with your shoes, all of the issues that go in producing shoes, I'm sure is tremendous, going back and forth and safe and whatever, or expensive, not expensive. And you could also say outside the country. So things happen outside the country that can't really easily be controlled, many of them wicked. So you could say, well, I don't want anything bad to happen with these shoes, and I feel comfortable they're okay in the U.S., but the things are imported from overseas, and then maybe we have these shoes here, they produce a lot of pollution. So I don't want any pollution in Detroit, Michigan. I'm going to send it to Bangkok. The factories in Bangkok, and all of the things that would not be allowed here are going on there. And so the cost to do something here because of all the protective regulations turns out to be, I don't know, $10, and it's $1 in Bangkok. And so that's another thing to think about, is the way, particularly in a world economy. So is it wicked that we impose these regulations on ourselves for protective purposes, and then we allow other countries, we push our bad stuff to other countries.
Well, I'm not sure if we should open that can of worms in the final minute or two. I think that's probably deserving of an entire half hour itself.
Yes,
But,
yes, indeed.
I mean, my flip side to that is we can only control so many things. And I think it's probably a bad thing to say, well, since we can't do everything, we shouldn't do anything. Since the Soviets are going to dump raw nuclear waste into their lakes, then let's just do the same thing here, because it doesn't matter in the end.
Well, actually, I think that's a valid point.
Yeah,
I mean, I think it's reasonable to consider what's going on, and of course, it just begs the question, the interconnection is what I was speaking about, and the interconnection does not stop at the border, but
Absolutely
it's a worldwide, and so
Yes.
that's the world we're in is really has a global dimension to it.
Yes.
Okay, well, Buck, thanks once again.
Thank you, sir.
Good comments. We always
Indeed.
like seeing you. Thank you. We'll talk again.
Indeed.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.